ever since the subprime crisis blew up the global financial system, I've had the luck, let's say the bitter luck, of been traveling throughout Europe to talk about what's happening in the peripheral side of the European continent. So I will be talking about things that are closer to home as regards Europe, and perhaps not talking about such larger issues as Raj just spoken about. So how many of you here know what austerity is? And I will explain why I'm asking this question shortly. How many? Well, everybody knows, yeah. I'm gonna tell you a little story. Earlier this year, I was touring Norway, northern Norway to be precise, and I did a talk a bit like this one, and I went on and on and on about austerity, and Attac members, they have a tendency towards jargon, towards economic jargon. So I went on and on and on about automatic stabilizer, which is unemployment benefits and all those kinds of things. And I talked about austerity and memoranda, which is the economic programs, the economic packages imposed by the IMF, the European Central Bank, and the European Commission on countries like Portugal, Greece, and Ireland, amongst others, which are less well known. And I went on and on and on about austerity, and by the end, a lady came up to me and said, well, you know, I really liked your talk, but I really don't know what austerity is. So something was missing there, and I found out that she was an MD at the local hospital, and that spoke to me because, well, if a person with a very, very high level of education doesn't know what austerity is, then I think that there's something wrong with the way we as Attac, as a movement, communicate. And then I went back to Germany, which is where I live half my year since the last 3 years. And I found out, reading the newspaper, it's very hard to find austerities in German media, because what you see is Sparpolitik. You know what Sparpolitik is? It's savings, the politics of saving, thrifty, let's say thrifty politics. What this means is that Germans save, and those Southerners, they spend their time and their money on nothing else but staying on the beach and not doing anything. This is actually a narrative that flows across the German media landscape. Certainly not to the left, which fortunately was able to resist this kind of thing, but it is a very, very strong narrative, a very strong stereotype, and it encompasses in different ways, but generally it encompasses all Mediterranean countries. And this is something that we, as members of the global justice movement, also need to face, because the way we see it, this is nothing more than the transfer of stereotypes closer and closer and closer to home, as it were, because these stereotypes, we know that since, well, I'm trying to keep it short, so in the last 40 to 50 years, you've seen these stereotypes relocating from Latin America to Africa, to several parts of the African continent, and now to Southern Europe. So the Spaniards, well, it kind of goes like this. The Greeks are those lazy bastards that they always torch things and they don't like to do anything. Spaniards are, they don't torch, but they like to be beaten up by the police, and they do all sorts of things, but they still don't work anything. And the Portuguese people, well, they're so mild and soft, and well, they just lay there, and they're being cut off with brutal, really, really brutal cutbacks. And that's the way it goes. Well, the Irish are a bit different, because in German media, Ireland is not spoken in such poor terms, because Ireland is perceived to be on its way to recovery, and once you look at economic indicators, as I would as an Attac geek, you see that's not really the case, but it's still being pushed as such. So this is just to say that austerity is not something that comes automatically in the broader media landscape as a very complex and complicated issue, which it is, because once you start looking at what's happening on the ground, and I've been to Greece 3 times this year. I've been to Greece in February, in Thessaloniki, which is in the north, and I've been 2 times to Athens. I was there first in late February, and I was there earlier this week. And I can tell you that I see I want to be polite and say I see the decline, but I also want to be forthcoming and say collapse, because that's what you are seeing now is social collapse. It's no longer about avoiding the abyss, as some mainstream center-left figureheads like to speak about Greece. This is now about an incoming humanitarian crisis, because you need to see that once you start taking back welfare systems as it is being done in Greece, there's nothing left. And when there's nothing left, you see things like I saw just last week. I went and entered the one subway station, and there was this little, so this is going to be a little bit graphic, so you excuse me, but I was so struck by the image, because it illustrates to such an extent, what's going on all over Southern Europe, that it really needs to be spoken about. So what happened was I entered into the subway station, and there was someone still holding, I don't know in English, how do you call it, when someone shoots heroin, puts something had that thing in the arm, and still had dry blood on the vein. So he had just shot himself, and he was wandering there, talking to his imaginary friends, I would suppose. And the thing that really struck me was not actually the wandering around and the image itself, was the reaction around him. It was no longer a reaction of disgust. It was no longer a reaction of, there goes the youth who doesn't know anything about life and shoots himself with drugs he doesn't know anything about. No, this was a reaction of pure despair. This was a reaction of looking at the kid, because he was no older than 23 to 25, and saying, this is the way our country is going. This is where we are headed towards. And I've seen this in Greece. I've seen this in Spain. In Spain, you have people killing themselves because they were thrown out of their houses by banks. And in Portugal, the same is happening to a smaller extent, but still happening. And now I want to stop with all the despair, and I want to talk very briefly about more uplifting stuff. I was in Greece, as I mentioned, and there's something happening there, something very, very uplifting. And the uplifting thing is, I don't know if you know about what happened just 3 to 4 days ago. The Greek public broadcasting station was shut down by government decree. The funny thing is, Greeks have a very ambiguous relationship, or had one, because the station is now closed down, even though there are workers locked in there. Very ambivalent relationship with the station. So even though there was an ambivalence towards the station, they still went there, 10,000 people, to protest the closure of the station by decree without going through parliament. This is important to note, because nowadays in Southern Europe, what you have is a bypassing of parliaments, of democratic legitimacy, and a bypassing of democratic politics and governance by decree, and by attributing all responsibility to the Troika, to those 3 institutions. Anyway, 10,000 people on the streets at the door of ERT, the Greek public broadcasting station, to protest its closure. In Spain, you have a very, very inspirational movement called PA, Plataforma Afectados por la Hipoteca, which is the foreclosure affected movements. What they do is they not only fight foreclosure, so they go to a foreclosed home and they prevent the police and the banking agents from evicting people, but they are also taking action in courts, and they're also using something called escrache. This is a tactic used in Argentina in 2001, and they go to the homes of politicians and they demonstrate there. They no longer allow protests to be held at a very abstract level. They're starting to use name and shame tactics, and that's also important because in our view, we need to take notice of the needs of people to name and shame and to be able to take action further. Again, in Portugal, several things, several occupations, several ideas are coming to the fore because as the states, just to finish a little note, the state isn't actually being reduced in size. It is simply being recomposed. So what you have is what one would call a Leviathan state, a police state emerging in these countries. So you have ever stronger police structures and ever weaker welfare structures. So you have very powerful police forces, like you see the things you see in Turkey. Well, I was just told, and that makes perfect sense, that they were actually provided resources by the Spanish police, and I've been to demonstrations in Spain, and I can assure you that makes a lot of sense, the way those people act in Turkey. Just last week, the Portuguese president was at an event near the border, and he had to be protected by Spanish police. So just to wrap it up, what we're seeing now in Southern Europe is the emergence of a new kind of politics, a post-democratic politics. But we are also seeing the double movement that someone 60 or 70 years ago spoke about, a reaction, a grassroots reaction. And you see that in Greece, you see that in Spain, you see that in Italy, you see that in Portugal, and that's very important for the global justice movement, not to see that there's a lot of creativity coming out of the ground, and the mainstream discourse is also changing because it no longer takes notice. It fears the kinds of consequences that these kinds of very creative, very active, very militant, I would say, things that are emerging out of the ground. Yeah, I'll wrap it up here. Thank you.